Welcome to the A-Dub Club, a podcast about sci-fi, fantasy, technology, pop culture, the internet, and general nerdery. There are three things that are important to know. One, we occasionally use swear words, but try to stay in the range of PG-13, or at least the kind of R that cool parents are fine with. Two, we may talk spoilers. In this particular episode, we discuss mostly just the concept of adulthood, so be warned. And finally, three, most importantly, the movie Boyhood was Barack Obama's favorite film of 2014. With that out of the way, welcome to the clubhouse. We have snacks. Welcome to the A-Dub Club. My name is Andrew Whipple.
I'm Alex Wade.
And it's a hot one. Like 7 inches from the midday sun. Is that how the song goes? I haven't listened to that song in a while.
Never heard of it.
Smooth by Santana featuring Rob Thomas of Matchbox 20.
Oh, I'm sure I've heard of it. I just don't know the lyrics to that one.
Yeah. It's the meme. It's the meme of the season being summertime, and it is very hot out. So if you can hear my air conditioner in the background, not sorry.
I'm not sorry at all. There's no starting apologies to my statement there.
No, none whatsoever. How has summer in New York been treating you?
It's been, really hot and muggy. I hate New York in the summer. It's awful because it's a trash city that makes it more humid, and it feels like the stench is coming. That you really understand that it was a swamp during the summertime.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
But we're not here to talk about summertime and weather and the scent of trash. We are here to talk about the question that you this time have. So why don't you kick us off, Alex Wade?
Yeah. So I'd been thinking about this, just basic question of like, what does adulthood mean? Or like, what is being an adult? And what does that mean? I'd kind of thought about this, I guess starting 2 months ago now, just as something kind of existential, just about my life in general, about where I am. And I don't really know why, but I feel like it'd be something kind of different and interesting that we could bring to the podcast. And we'll figure out how it relates.
Was there any like inception point that like kicked off this being a thing that was starting to go in your brain?
I would say it was right around the end of my class that I was taking. I was taking a 9-month-long acting class, and we had like a final show, and it really, so there's another like 5-month-long course that you have to take, or that you can take, starting in a month or two, for me. And I was like, wait a second, if I wanted to, I could just not be committed to this extra 5 months of my life. It's just the concept of having decisions like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in thinking about adulthood, on the one hand, there's like, we can sort of do the wishy-washy answer that I'm sure we'll eventually end up at, and like spoil it now that like it's a construct that comes out of, it's a construct that comes out of society. It's different for every people. It's one of those weird things that's like both very real but also very fake, and it wishy-washy, blah blah blah. But I do think even within that sort of wishy-washy end answer, there is something interesting in thinking about these like big sociological and societal constructs,
expectations,
and expectations that like, how is that interplay between the things that are sort of true and the things that are true versus the things that are common versus the things that are expected versus the things that are only true because they're expected, and because they're expected, they're then made themselves true. And I think adulthood, it reminds me a lot of like thinking about like, oh, what is the definition and the societal impact, and like, is gender a social construct and all the stuff around that? But with adulthood, it's a lot less sticky, and has less impact on people's like lives and psychologies, to discuss the metaphysics of adulthood in a way that, the way that the metaphysics of gender is significantly more of a hot button thing that we're probably not capable or equipped to discuss.
No, as much as we can try, which we won't.
No. But, do you have something you're going to go on?
Yeah, I guess. So for me, a simple one-word-ish answer of like freedom and control, I guess, is like the baseline that almost everyone I think can kind of jump off. Like, yeah, sure. I guess I'm kind of trying to answer to your like wishy-washy sentiment. I think this is something I actually can like what is the most base thing that we can get that is universal throughout almost everyone in adulthood. And I think that is it, is the freedom, a personal freedom and control is kind of a, I don't know, the markers of what you can do, you know, like the sensibility of like you're beholden to no one but yourself in a sense, if you truly want to be. Like I can go out to a fucking mountain and live as a hobo if I want to, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think not only is that a thing that is generally speaking common among what everyone sees as adulthood, that also is a good distinguishing feature from adolescence, that a lot of adolescence is marked by, at least in some frames, in some circumstances, the lack of that control and that freedom and that ability to make your own decisions. And I do think that also if you think about adulthood as a thing defined by the society, like one way to look at adulthood is through how does society define adulthood and how does society set itself up to like treat adulthood. You see that the progression from adolescence to adulthood is one where like most of the structures are built to give you progressively more and more freedom and more control. I think the classic upper middle class United States example is as you go through like the school system, as you get from elementary school to middle school to high school to college, it puts more and more of that control and that freedom onto your plate versus having it on the plates of parents and administrators and teachers and like.
Yeah. Something I wish we could talk about more, but I feel like we don't have enough knowledge in general, is just like cultural differences of this is very much like an American kind of concept, I think, of having ultimate freedom of the individual and the purpose of college and schooling, et cetera, is to eventually be on your own out there in the world. I feel like that versus some, especially, I mean, a lot of other cultures. I don't want to pinpoint out any other culture because I can't really point fingers in that way. Are definitely more, family oriented, I guess, and more group than group is more important than the individual in a lot of other cultures.
Yeah. And so that's true. So is that the fact that we're immediately gravitating towards this like very individualistic idea of what it means to be an adult, indicative of the fact that we live in a culture where individualism is a key value? And probably, yeah,
I think that's something especially defined by America is like, your individuality is paramount in most cases.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, the other thing that I think is interesting about this idea of control is talking a lot about like the freedom side of things, where it's like I am the one who can make the choices, at least at like the reductive base level. The whole Spider-Man great power, great responsibility thing, then that also puts on you the like responsibility to be expected to make the sorts of choices, which I think is the two sides of those coins are really married again in at least the frame that we're coming at from a like what does it mean to be an adult in the United States of America. Basically at every point in time where you get progressively more freedom, you also get progressively more responsibility in how using that freedom will impact you and to some degree impact others.
Yeah. And that's this, I don't know, not scary part, but like you have that choice, you have that capability to burn bridges if you so choose, which like the amount of times when, you're like, I can't, as a 13-year-old kid, there's some, horrible, awful things I can do, obviously, but there are certain, I don't know, exceptions given to me because like, he's just a 13-year-old boy who's, he doesn't know shit about the world and he's, let's blame his parents.
Yeah. No, totally true. massive disparities in treatment of different racial groups aside, there is that idea of like literally codified in law is this idea of like being tried as an adult versus tried as a juvenile, and those have different levels of punishment and repercussion that are tied to them, based on the concept that like you're not yet an adult if you do some like terrible stuff at 14, unless you do something that is so terrible that we have to say, never mind, we're going to treat you as an adult.
Yeah.
In the eyes of the law. Again, massive disparities in terms of the way that like white people get to be treated as kids far later into their adolescence than black people tend to do. So not to minimize any of that.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that I think we kind of got to the answer a lot quicker than I necessarily thought it would, about like, oh yeah, you actually have a pretty good answer about like, it's like freedom and control, and freedom and control being two sides of the same coin. Like that's sort of like, I feel like most things that I would think about as adulthood, like, yeah, they probably can eventually all tie back to that.
Boil down to that.
Cool. Episode done. We're finished. But I think that does make me think about like, so maybe actually taking even further step back, like, okay, so if that's what adulthood is, like, why does it exist? Where does it come from? Is like adulthood a thing that's part of human biology? Is it a thing that's part of like society? Caveat that probably there's an actual real answer that like smart evolutionary biologists or sociologists know, and we'll just deal with that, I guess, never.
God.
But at least in our conversation, like, okay, we know what adulthood is, why adulthood.
Yeah. I think, okay, this is going to sound super tangential, but bear with me for a second. I was getting into an argument with our new CTO at my company, who is Russian, about socialism and how it relates to our company as our company. Because as I was talking to Whipple earlier, we are having this experiment kind of thing in our company where certain engineers are getting money, and like capitalism was brought up about like, oh, this is like incentivizing everyone, blah, 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 whatever. Right. So we're having this conversation about socialism. And I was kind of bringing it back to like, okay, well, what is socialism in a more like narrower in a smaller group of people? Like, what is that? Oh, that's just like a tribe, right? Like in 10,000 BC or something, you just had tribes of people who roamed around. Like that was the most, that situation, adulthood did not mean freedom and control. It meant very specifically that you like, oh, go, you're the hunter, or you're the gatherer, you take care of the elder, or you do whatever to help out around with the tribe. But that's definitely less about your own individual choices and your own individual actions than it is as more a cohesive group, you know? So I guess when it got to the point when you didn't have to do that anymore, when you didn't have to be the person responsible for whatever, when you're only beholden to yourself, kind of in a more modern sense, I think that's really where the modern sense of adulthood came from.
Interesting. Yeah. And actually, like, what was the thing that we said like 400 million episodes ago? Qualifying statements. Qualifying statements aside, like that does sort of ring some bells about one, thinking about how like, okay, the key thing that went from like being hunter-gatherers and being in small tribes is the idea of like everyone is responsible for their own thing, and then we get into societies, and the key thing that like allows societies to flourish is that people can specialize. You can have like farmers get really good at farmers, and hunters get really good at hunters, and metalsmiths get really good at metalsmithery, and et cetera, ad infinitum. So on the one hand, yes, there's sort of that side of things. But then I do sort of, this is entirely me talking out of my ass, so I have no idea how true this is, but I kind of remember hearing that like, not so much the concept of adulthood, but the concept of adolescence is a relatively modern invention, like maybe Victorian era, like the Western concept of adolescence, which now I'm thinking about it, that would have been a cool thing to start to research before doing this episode. But we never do any prep work. So the most close thing that we do is like, we're going to watch Detective Pikachu before we talk about it. And that's about it. I think that kind of squares with your idea of
Did
like
you
as
define
getting
adolescence as like teenage? Sorry.
yeah, sort of. I think like hey, write in if you know, and that way we'll have people that actually write into our show, and we'll have proof that people listen to it. But my understanding, fourth hand, is that like, yeah, it's this idea of like adolescence is a thing. Like, okay, you're going to be. I think adolescence, yeah, that teenagerdom of like, okay, young kids always are like have been kids for a while, but this like in between state of before you're going to be a full adult, then yeah, you're focusing on like education, learning your trade, all that before you get into actually going into the real world is a more modernish invention. But I am not 100,000% sure about that. But that would be interesting. That does sort of like at least square up with that rough timeline idea. And that also, if that is true, that squares with the idea that like if adolescence and then adulthood as the thing that adolescence is defined against is a relatively modern invention, the mere fact that it is a societal invention says something.
Yeah. Like, why is that our desire to be more individual, you know? Like, where does that come from?
Yeah. And I wonder if maybe if it is it the kind of thing that's like, is it a byproduct of once a society gets to this level of complexity, then this bifurcation of youth, adolescence versus adulthood becomes a thing purely out of the like to have this kind of a complex culture, it's going to have this concept in order to support it? Or is it like a thing that's in human brains and now only now are we able to like express this latent desire for like an adulthood versus an individualism? Because you do think about like, what is it? It's right about our age at like 25 is when the prefrontal cortex finally stops being in like a developing state. So like there are actual physiological differences between being prepubescent and then being a teen and going through puberty, and then versus being like 25 and having your brain finally like stop going crazy.
Yeah. Oh,
which like not to rag on any youth that might be listening to it, but like before we were recording this episode, like Wade and I were talking about, like sometimes you're hanging around like college kids and like literally you feel like they have different brains than you when you hear them talk.
Yeah.
Especially like that seems to be a much more recent, although I also kind of felt that when I was in college and listening to high school kids talk, but I a lot of the times I chalk that up to like, you guys don't have to like deal with a job, like, and you're still in school, you don't have anything to worry about, blah, blah, blah. Like, hey, I have taxes and shit to do. But also maybe part of it is that literally like they do actually have different brains than we do.
Yeah, it's bizarre because it's like you don't, I mean, yeah, I'll talk a little bit about this exact thing that happened to me. Like last night I was talking to someone and there was just moments where I just felt like this is a person who has a different thought process because they are younger. Like they started espousing some, I don't know, philosophical bullshit or something. They were 19 and I'm 25, and they were saying something about how everyone can be profound, but such and such. I don't know. I don't remember exactly what it said, but she said it in such a way that made it seem like it was this wisdom that they were espousing, and I like bit my tongue from and didn't, instead of saying, well, duh, no shit. But like that's the difference. Like you learn those things, right?
Well, yeah, even there, I mean, one, obviously, hey, if you are the person that Wade was talking to that has the faux profundity, get in touch with us. We want to have you on the podcast. Two, you can tell us. Two, even there, like that's a fun in the way that you said, like, oh yeah, you just learn that as you grow old. It's now, to be clear, we're never going to get to the answer because like it's probably there is a real answer that smarter people than us know, and like neither of us are know enough to be able to get to it. But like that tension of, is it the reason that we're able to like bite our tongues and say like, okay, yeah, 19-year-olds, whatever. How much of that is our brains have solidified to not be like the goop that they were 6 years ago versus we've had more experiences. Like we're out in the world and like we've been beaten down by reality to a degree that isn't the case when you're in like these environments. Again, these progressive environments of more and more freedom or more freedom and responsibility. Where when you're in college, like, yeah, you don't have as much to be concerned about. So you can spend your time like starting to think about like all the philosophical stuff that then when you're 25, you're like, okay, yeah, cool. I have to go to work. What's on Netflix?
Yeah. It's weird to think about like this feels like it's defined as like wisdom, you know, like, I don't know, maybe a less poetic word than wisdom. What, common sense? I don't know. Like,
yeah,
just like, actually, I have another example of there. I have a friend who this is fascinating. So she reminds me a lot of this person who I met last night, because of this kind of lack of perspective of this, like, oh, like my friend also says things that like she thinks are profound, but are just like kind of no duh kind of moments for me. But she's 30, right? And like there's an 11-year age difference, but they still have this same kind of perspective on things. So it feels, in that situation, it feels definitely more just like lack of experiences, because my friend, she doesn't have many, I guess, exposing experiences to the world in, you know, those kinds of ways. She has her own myopic kind of view on certain things. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, actually, so that actually gets at an interesting thing that like we are, because there is the other side of adulthood, which is the to get back at the like the metaphysics of it all. There's the root of adulthood, at least as we've defined it, is this idea of like freedom and control. But going along with that, there's a whole host of things that are like markers that correlate to that, but don't necessarily 100% match up all the time. And so I think like there's some of those that are examples like, okay, you own a house, you have kids, you graduate from college, you pay your taxes, you get your promotion, you cook your own food, blah, blah, blah. Pay off your student loans. Like there's all the stuff that are like those sort of economic and societal markers. And then there's other markers that I think is kind of what we're talking about now of, yeah, you don't say bullshit, faux profound stuff that a college freshman would say, because I guess the implication and why we think of those things as tied to adulthood is that you've had more freedom and had more control, and by taking your life into your own hands, you've had the experiences to get to the point where you have that wisdom and that common sense, in the same way that like, because you have control and you have freedom, you should be buying your own house and things like that. But as we do see, like there isn't a one-to-one correlation, like especially some of the more economic markers is less and less doable for people of our age group, because the boomers destroyed, took all the good shit for themselves. So that's fun. Which I wonder, now that I think about that, talking about adulthood, like, do you feel like you're an adult?
I would say thoroughly yes. I don't know when that shift happens, but by now, absolutely.
Okay.
I feel like I am there. Yeah, there are a lot of moments where there are choices where I'm realizing where I forget, in a sense, like for example, of like taking this 5-month course. I had just kind of resigned myself, I guess, to the fact that I was going to take it. But then it's like, oh, I can choose not to take it. Like that has a series of effects of like, oh, then I won't have as good standing probably in the studio. I might be not burning some bridges, but definitely not strengthening those bridges. But I would say, if I am asked the question, do I feel like an adult? Yes, absolutely. How about you?
Interesting. I kind of don't. And for me, it's more that like there are specific moments when I feel like I'm an adult, but I kind of feel like me is looking outside of my own body at me. And it's like, oh yeah, I guess that person right there who happens to be me is an adult. And almost always those are things that are tied along to like those sort of conventional markers of adulthood of like, oh yeah, okay, cool. I got a raise at work. Okay, I applied for a new job. Oh, I signed a lease. Like I even small things sometimes like, oh, hey, yeah, I cooked an interesting dinner, and like went out and did the whole process myself. Like those sorts of things that in that moment I get that out of body, I guess I'm an adult experience, but I don't feel that as like I don't feel like that baseline confidence, or I don't think of myself as any more or less of an adult than I did basically at any point since I was like 15, probably.
Yeah. Interesting. For me, I had I don't know, not epiphany. My responsibilities, I feel like, started a lot when I was a camp counselor. Actually, no, not when I became a camp like at my camp. There's like, there's a teen program where you're like shadowing counselors, and then you become a co-counselor, right? And for my experience for that, I had either amazing co-counselors who like gave me so much responsibility and freedom and were like truly trusted in me and like allowed me to flourish and grow and to basically be an adult during my week with them being a co-counselor, or the exact opposite, where they were so shitty and trash and they were basically like 18, 19-year-old like fucking idiots who were at camp to try to get laid. And I had to step up in order to like make sure our kids were alive by the end of the week, because literally one camper counselor stepped on a camper and like,
yikes.
It's like this fascinating responsibility, like
prime Friday the 13th setup right there.
he stepped on the kid. The kid was underneath his bunk, like looking for something. The counselor didn't see him. Whatever. It was a mistake. Like you can step on a kid accidentally once, and that's fine. Kind of, not really, but I get it. The bad part was the kid started crying, and then the counselor was like, "Stop crying. Why are you crying? That's not going to fix anything." Like, dude.
Ooh. See, I mean, hey, all it takes is one kid to go Jason Voorhees on you. Just takes the one. Yeah. Anyway, I interrupted with a goof.
Yeah. I mean, now I was done. Yeah. Responsibility. It was,
okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think I can see that. And I do actually, now that because like this is the first time that I've sort of put any real thought into the fact that I kind of don't feel like an adult. I think in my case, doing, only 5 minutes of introspection, I think it's a mix of that, like, okay, there's enough things that signify and are supposed to make you think that you're like, if you look at it from the perspective that we were just talking about at the very beginning of like adulthood means you have freedom and responsibility, then yeah, 100% by every definition, I am an adult because I have that. I have more of that than I've ever had in my life. If you look at it from the second order version where it's, do I have the markers of things that mean adulthood? And then by the fact that I have those markers, then you're assuming that I have freedom and responsibility, then no. I think the inverse is also true, that like, because my life on the one hand feels kind of adolescent if you look at just like the markers of what it means to quote unquote be an adult, those second order markers. On the flip side, I do think the to fully give faux profound 19-year-old that Alex Wader's talking to, that we want to have on the podcast, the benefit of the doubt. Like I felt exactly the same level of being like, I still felt like a fully formed person when I was a teenager. I didn't feel like an adult because I knew that, like, of course I'm not an adult, I'm a teenager, but like, I didn't feel like any more or less of a fully complete and capable human being at any point in those times. It's only then looking back now that I'm like, oh, I am a different person than I was then, but I still, like, the way I feel now versus the way that I felt then, there's that, like, it's still the same person in both cases. So I think it's that, like, I don't feel like I'm an adult right now because I feel the same that I have for the last 10 years.
Sure.
And I mean that in both ways, that I felt the way that I do now then, and my life looks the way that it did then now, minus, obvious changes.
Yeah. I mean, you're still doing some fucking A-Dub Club shit with, your high school friend, right?
Oh, that's entirely the reason we need to quit this show. Like, as soon as we quit the show, then I'll feel like a real adult.
That's it.
That's what'll make me a real boy.
Great. End podcast.
We solved it. That's what it is. Adulthood is not doing the A-Dub Club. So it turns out there's a lot of adults out there. Basically, everyone else is an adult.
Yeah. Your newly born son, adult. Not you specifically. I'm
adult
talking like
until
you as the podcast listenee who is listening to this right now. The royal you. Isn't that a phrase?
Well, two things to that. One, until we get that newborn son on our podcast, we're always looking for guests. Two, I do have to say, like, by listening, if like us doing the A-Dub Club makes us not adults, like you by listening, at least that's like a little knock against you as well. Like you're not as bad as not as bad as us, but like it's questionable.
Yeah.
Anything else that comes to mind in the world of adulthood?
Yeah. This, I guess, is more personally kind of about me, just in general. I have always felt like I have been a more, I guess, like childish kind of person, and I'm definitely a more, carefree being in a sense like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess how that relates to this is like, okay, so even though, like, I am that way, and like I haven't changed in that sense since I was a kid. It's like I don't really, I guess, know how that influences my feelings about this, which is weird because, like, even though I have like a childish sensibility in a lot of ways, I still definitely would answer that question with a very affirmative. I feel like an adult.
Oh, that is the coolest thing that you could say, because I think I'm kind of the opposite in that, like, I kind of always felt more of an adult as a youth. And now here I am, the one that's like, yeah, I mean, I guess I am an adult, but I don't feel like I'm an adult.
Fair. Yeah.
Interesting. And again, I think getting back to it, there's like the core of adulthood as we define it versus those second order markers of adulthood. And yeah, if you look at the core of the adulthood thing, yeah, duh, obviously, no question, we're both adults.
Yeah. Also,
our brains aren't Goop.
I mean, speak for yourself, okay?
If you want to not be an adult anymore and listen to our podcast, you can do that on Spotify. You can do that on Apple Podcasts. You can do that on Google Podcasts, and you can do it in any other podcast place where you are probably already listening to this at this point. So this is a redundant bit to be talking about. You can also find us on Twitter at the AW Club. That's THEAWCLUB. You can email us at theawclub@gmail.com. Same thing, THEAWCLUB@gmail.com. You can go to theadub.club. That's THEADUB.CLUB. Has all of our links to all of our goodness, including our topics guide. Our topics guide is the place where you can go there and see like all the different things that we've talked about. You click on any one of those links, it'll take you to all the episodes where that thing is discussed. So you can click on, I guess, adulthood, and that's where you will find this particular episode. And with that, I think that is everything.
I think so. A-Dub Club out.
A-Dub Club out.
And control, I mean, now this is getting super off topic, but I'm just going to say it anyway and maybe edit it out and post. I don't know. We'll find out.
Go for it.
But I was reading, I'm going to take that again.